Welcome everyone. Thanks for being early attendees. I've got the list counting up really quickly now, so thank you for coming on board. We're going to start right on 12:30, so thanks for clicking join nice and early. Great. Thank you everyone. Look, our numbers are looking fantastic. We've got a nice short, sharp 45-minute session, so I'm going to get going because you've all been terrific in giving up your time. So can I welcome all of our AAA members on the line? We've got a great turnout and we got some great feedback for this one. And with lots of our innovative product manufacturers, particularly performance parts and four-wheel drive. So thank you for joining us. We know that EMDG is a very important program for our members. Both for our members and for AAA. We're an EMDG recipient as well. And we thought this program would be of use. So thank you for proving us right and welcome to everyone. Can I also acknowledge my AAA colleagues on the line? So Michelle Vizzuti, our events manager. None of these webinars happen without Michelle, so thank you. Our CEO, Stuart Charity, is on the line. A shout out to Nigel Bishop, Membership Development Manager and convener of our four-wheel drive group. And Tiffany Conway, Head of Marketing, is also on the line, so welcome. When we decided that we think you would value a session on EMDG and how it looks in its revised form, we reached out to Grant Thornton because we do a lot of work with our partners at Grant Thornton, particularly in business planning. Grant Thornton's worked with us extensively on the Auto Innovation Centre, so we thought we might reach out to them to see whether they could give us some assistance. And we got that right too, because they're experts in this field. So I would like to introduce Sandy Boswell and her team. But before I do that, just a couple of housekeeping matters. We are taking Q&As, so make sure you use the question and answer box down the bottom, not the chat one. Please list all of your questions and look, do it as they occur to you. Don't wait till the end. Now, Sandy and her team have kindly agreed to answer any additional questions that we don't get to today offline. So don't let a long list dissuade you. Please put all of your questions up. And when we send out the post-attendee survey, we'll send out the answers to the questions that we did not get to. So keep them coming. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sandy Boswell and her team. So Sandy is a partner for the Innovation Incentives Group at Grant Thornton. She's actually got 25 years experience, mostly in matters of IP and R&D. She's not just a person who's an expert in compliance, but she's an expert in intellectual property throughout the whole life cycle of innovation. So this is an important component of her work, and she heads up a very talented team. I'm happy to introduce Chloe Cullen to you because EMDG is actually her field of expertise. So she's the person to turn to for all matters of specific detail. And I'm also pleased that Alana Bayliss is with us. Alana is an expert in matters to do with law and with tax. So can I suggest if you have any kind of audit on your Oz industry grant that you'll want to remember Alana's details as well. So without further ado, can I hand the webinar over to Sandy's capable hands.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and it's great to be here with all of your members, and we really appreciate the opportunity today to have a session. Before we get started, I always like to do a welcome to country. So Grant Thornton Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So welcome everyone. I also wanted to highlight, and I think Leslie mentioned, but we are recording today's session, so just so you're aware of that. As was covered in the intro, we've got three of us here today from Grant Thornton. So myself, Chloe and Alana, they are our go-to specialists on all things EMDG. And we're going to run through a few things with you today, largely covering off on the new EMDG reform model, which opened last week for applications for the FY22 year. But we're also going to give you a quick overview of the existing model because that's still in operation as well. So broadly, what is the EMDG? Well, it's the federal government's cornerstone funding program to encourage Australian businesses to find and seek export markets offshore. So it encompasses goods, services, IP, and software. It allows businesses to access grants up to 8 times, 8-year period, and it or to a total of $770,000. This year, the program is different than any previous year. So both the existing scheme and the reform model will be in operation at the same time. So there's an ability to look back and look forward. So this is what we're going to cover off on today. The rest of the session, I'm going to have some very direct questions to Chloe and Alana, who are our EMDG experts. We've got a team of about 4 or 5 here at Grant Thornton that can assist you. One other quick thing to raise just before I get into the Q&A is the Trusted Trader program. I was talking to a partner, Richard Nutt, yesterday, and this is also something about just streamlining your supply chain management. So if you want to get quicker turnaround times at borders, that's a program to also look at, and do reach out if you want to have some more information on that. You get accredited for that, and it is a really huge benefit around getting your goods through customs. So I just wanted to raise that as we're talking about all things exporting. As I said, we will go through a Q&A session, and it's based on a lot of questions we've had to date about the new program, plus the old program. So hopefully you'll find it relevant. Please pop any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll attempt to answer those at the end of the session. So let's get started. If I'm thinking about making a claim for an EMDG grant, and this is applicable to both programs, what type of costs can I include? And Chloe, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. So as you can see, there are quite a range of costs that we can look to claim through the EMDG program. So just pop these up on a slide. But to start off with the overseas representative category, which is somebody who is based permanently overseas. And they basically just need to be, representing your business and conducting BD activities on your behalf. You can look to claim costs associated with their salaries there. Unfortunately, commissions are excluded. Moving on to marketing consultants, this person or persons, you can have more than one, and same for overseas reps, you can have multiple of those as well. But for a marketing consultant, they can be based either here in Australia or overseas, and basically they just need to be assisting you with your marketing activities, finding potential retailers or distributors overseas, competitor analysis, or even managing socials and things like that. Marketing trips, which seem to be a little bit of a thing of the past at the moment, but hopefully we'll be reigniting that soon. But basically that's all costs associated with, attending trade shows, conferences, or meeting with potential buyers, distributors, retailers, or licensees. Then we've got free samples, which basically you can claim the costs associated with the manufacturing cost of the product that you're sending overseas, as well as the freight there. And again, they have to be provided to somebody who is not a resident of Australia, and potential buyers and things like that. And finally, before I hand over to Alana, trade shows as well. So basically everything you can think of associated with attending a trade show, whether that be freighting product, getting a booth designed, built, furniture hire, all of those type of things can be included. Where they're a domestic trade show, you can claim costs there as well, but it is limited to the percentage of international attendees there as well. So I'll hand over to Alana to go through the rest of them as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. So our next category of costs, there's promotional literature. Now, this is a very common category of costs that we see in EMDG claim. And it's a really good one because there's no cap on the amount of cost you can include in this category. So that covers everything you can think of really related to advertising, whether that be in a physical form or digital advertising as well. So your online advertisements, social media. We often see a lot of direct-to-consumer clients with large Facebook ad or Google ad spends as well. It also includes your traditional advertising, so your print ads and your brochures. Now, along with that as well, you can also claim the costs of creating the content for your ads. So whether that's graphic designers, product photography, videos as well, they can all be included, and those costs really add up soon. But you do need to remember those costs do need to be apportioned to the overseas promotional purposes. So that's excluding any Australian or New Zealand audience of those ads. The next category there is not as common, and that's the cost of bringing a potential overseas buyer to Australia to view your products and services here. Now that needs to be for a marketing purpose, so before they sign any contract of sale, and you can look at claiming their flights and accommodation and meals. The last category of costs that you can claim under the FY21 program is intellectual property. And now this is a very common category of costs as well. As we mentioned in the introduction, Sandy and Chloe and myself have a background working in IP firms. So we do see this one a lot, and it's that ability to claim the costs of registering your patents, your designs, and your trademarks in overseas jurisdictions. But this category does have a maximum cap of $50,000 per claim. So that's something to note as well. Under the new program going forward, those caps on expenditure categories are going to be removed, which is really great and gives you some more flexibility about the type of costs you can include in a claim. And also as well, with the new reform model, they're adding a new category of eligible costs in. So for applicants who are new to export, you can actually claim the costs of training for your marketing your products and teaching your team how to market your products as well. So there's a lot there, and I hope that gives you a bit of an overview of those types of expenses that you can look to include in an EMDG claim, both looking back retrospectively to FY21 and going forward as well under the new program.
Yeah, there's a lot of costs, isn't there, that you can pick up, which is great. And we're already getting questions through in our Q&A chat box, so that's great. I'd like to now touch briefly on the existing program and the eligibility requirements that it covers. Alana, can you talk us through, for those that might be looking to make a claim under the FY21 year, the last claim you can make under that program, what do I need to know if I want to apply for that grant for the FY21 year?
Yeah, Sandy. So there's a few eligibility criteria that first need to be met. So the business can be any entity structure. You just need an ABN. So sole traders are completely okay to apply. Turnover of that entity needs to be under $50 million that year. And you need to have spent a minimum of $15,000 on eligible expenses in that year. Now, if anyone's listening who hasn't claimed before, you can actually go back 2 financial years in your first application. So you could actually claim expenses all the way back to FY20. So from 1 July 2019 up to 30 June 2021 as part of your FY21 EMDG application. That includes 8 months of time pre-COVID. So if anyone hasn't made a claim before, that could be a really great opportunity to look into if you've had any international trade shows, travel overseas, and all of those costs before COVID shut down our overseas travel opportunities. Now, claims for FY21 are actually open now. And they close at the end of November if you're a self-lodger. But if you use a QIP consultant, like we are at Grant Thornton, it extends your lodgement period till February 2022, so to next year. Now, something else to know about the FY21 program is it is an entitlement program rather than a competitive grant, but Austrade do only have a limited pool of funds to provide to all applicants. So that means if there's too many applications, the program can be oversubscribed and your grant amount can be reduced. So to account for this, Austrade actually pay the grant in 2 tranche payments, which means you get your first tranche of up to $30,000 of your grant, but then you have to wait for the remainder of your grant to the final week of June 2022, once Austrade have had a chance to review all the applications, and then they might apply a downward apportionment across all applicants to make sure that the grants are retained in their pool of funds to give out in the year. So Sandy, that does add a little bit of uncertainty there about the FY21 program, just in terms of exactly what grant amount you'll get. You can really only be guaranteed that first $30,000 tranche payment. And you also do have to wait until the end of June 2022 for that final payment to be received.
Yeah, no, great summary. And I think one question that's coming through a lot is New Zealand covered? So just quickly, is New Zealand export activities covered?
Unfortunately not. Austrade look at New Zealand as being a little bit too close to us, and we do have quite strong business relationships there. So both under the prior reimbursement model program and the new reform program, costs, of marketing New Zealand unfortunately aren't covered.
No, so they're not eligible. So Chloe, what's changing under the new reform model that just opened? So we now know it's open for application. So it's really important that there's some focus on this because it's got some different timeframes, I understand.
Yeah, for sure. So at the moment, the underlying principles of the program are remaining the same, where, it's obviously in place to assist you with your international marketing efforts. We've obviously covered off on a bit of the eligibility, but if you've been involved in the previous scheme, you'll know that there's sort of a little bit of devil in the detail when on the face of it, it looks quite straightforward. But when you go through the actual application process, there are a lot of things that you need to consider on an entity by entity basis, specific to your business. But essentially, the new program has been introduced to provide upfront funding certainty. So for those of you that have applied before, and as Alana was just explaining, under the existing model, it's sort of been a bit unclear as to how much funding you're going to receive. It's sort of we'll give you this much here, and then you won't find out until the final week in June how much you're getting. So essentially, what this model, the reform model, is there to address is to provide you with upfront funding certainty. So this is obviously the transitional year. But moving forward, it'll basically be like before spending any money, you will know how much grant funding you're entitled to. It is unfortunately not an upfront payment. It will still operate sort of in a reimbursement scheme, and we'll obviously go through how the program application works. But most notably, one of the changes is that turnover threshold reduces from 50 million down to 20 million. So for those of you with turnover over 20 million, your last opportunity to access EMDG funding will be through the existing program. It is still on an entity by entity basis. So, if you're part of a larger consolidated group, it really is only based on the applicant entity that turnover, not your consolidated group. As mentioned before by Alana, the expenditure caps for the existing program, for example, with IP of $50,000 under the new program, that is removed, which is great for those of you who have high IP spend. And now there are 3 different tiers to apply as you move through the scheme, which are up on the screen now. So basically, these are meant to reflect the 3 stages in a business's export journey. So for those of you who have never exported before, but are ready to export, you'll need to meet Austrade's export readiness tool. So essentially what that means is, your product or service needs to be available for sale, not still undergoing R&D or testing and things like that. And basically what that allows you to access is a 2-year grant agreement with Austrade with a maximum yearly payment of $40,000. Moving through to tier 2, this is for those of you who are already exporting and, likely for those of you who have received claims before, but where you're continuing to expand in the current markets that you have already been operating in. So essentially, doing what you've always done, not doing anything too different. You'll then fall into tier 2. This increases to a 3-year grant agreement with Austrade, and then the maximum yearly payment of $80,000 increases as well. So over the life of the 3 years, that's a maximum of $240,000. And finally, the largest tier, being tier 3, is where a business is doing a strategic shift. That's things like, if you're releasing a new product, focusing on a totally new market, moving from e-commerce to retail, just essentially something that is strategically different from what you've done in previous years. And that's $150,000 maximum a year over a 3-year grant agreement as well. And lastly, just something that is a bit different from last year as well, is that all successful grant recipients and the funding that they receive will be made publicly available. So Austrade is going to be releasing a list of who got grants and for how much. So just something to be aware of that is different from last year as well.
Yeah, they were definitely, I think, thinking around streamlining the program. So what you just heard is very much on that basis, and also transparency. So it's where the government is sort of hitting more broadly on various programs. So no surprises that they're doing that. Alana, What's the application process for the new grant program?
Yeah, so this is probably something that a lot of people on the call will be thinking about at the moment. If you've applied for EMDG before and you're looking at that FY22 grant period. So the first step is to submit your application, and that's what Austrade are going to use to assess your eligibility and determine that grant amount that you can receive. So what's new about the application process is that it revolves around a business plan. So that's a bit of an overview of your forecasted international marketing spend over that next 2 to 3 year period across those eligible cost categories that Chloe and I ran through at the start of the webinar. So it looks a bit different because you're forward looking to that next period, trying to give as good as you can of an estimate of what you're going to do in your marketing activities, which I know can be very hard to predict at the moment. Now, the program is actually open for applications right now. It opened on August 16th and they close for applications on the 30th of November. Something important to note as well is that is a hard deadline for the end of applications to the program. So it isn't like the existing program where you could use a QIP consultant like Grant Thornton is and get an extended deadline through to February. You do really need to note that that 30th of November timeframe in your calendar and make sure you're prepared so you don't miss out on those forward-looking grants. So once you submit your application, Austrade will then review all of the applications at once, and they have said that they will get back to you on whether you're successful and receive the grant agreement within 8 to 10 weeks. Now that will fall over the Christmas New Year period, so we are a bit realistic there, and we do expect that that might stretch over into February or March, but we won't exactly know until we go through that process because it is the first year that Austrade are rolling it out. Now, if your grant application is successful, then Austrade will provide you with a grant agreement. Now, this is going to include the grant amount that you're eligible for, and you can be certain you'll receive if you meet some criteria, and it will also outline what you need to do to receive that grant milestone payment. Now, to receive the milestone payment under your grant agreement, you need to provide Austrade with a milestone report that evidences your overseas marketing spend. So this will be later in the year, near the end of that FY22 period, once you've already then conducted your marketing activities and have incurred those costs. Something we've heard from a lot of our clients at the moment is questions around what do I need to evidence my spend in those milestone reports? And it's important to note Austrade haven't actually released a draft milestone report yet, so we can't be 100% certain on what that'll include. But based on the guidelines about the reform program, we do know that you do definitely need to substantiate that your costs were spent by that business on those eligible marketing activities. So that can be an invoice, a bank statement, or any of the other supporting material that you might be used to keeping under the current program. So don't worry too much about your substantiation right now. Just get your application together and keep records that you would normally do under the old program, your invoices, your bank statements, contracts with your contractors, all of those sort of things, so you can evidence your spend. And when more information is released about those milestone reports, we can definitely clarify that further with you if you'd like more assistance around that.
Yeah, so at Grant Thornton, we will assist our clients with the milestone reports as we do with the previous application, so we can help you with that as it goes through. So it's not a first come, first serve basis, the new program. They're going to assess everybody all at once. That's one of the questions that we've been asked in the chat room. Mm-hmm. Okay, so a question that we get a lot, we've been doing a huge number of calls and meetings around this program in the past few weeks, so we're well versed in the questions that people have front of mind. And one we get a lot is, will my grant be the same as the amount that I apply for? So going forward, so Chloe, can you answer this one for me?
Yeah, so while the program has been introduced to provide that upfront funding certainty to applicants, that doesn't mean that you will get the amount that you apply for. So there still is going to be the set pool of funds that Austrade uses to apportion across all eligible applicants. So essentially, rather than waiting till June to figure out what that amount is going to be, you're provided that certainty when Austrade provides those grant agreements. We're sort of thinking around February, March, that those will be released, and that will let you know upfront what your entitlement is. Noting obviously in this first transition year, you would have incurred, maybe 6 months worth of that spending, but essentially it'll sort of pave the way for the final 6 months of that year, plus then either 1 or 2 financial years left in your grant agreement of what your entitlement is going to be. And then essentially it is up to you just to spend the required amount to meet that milestone payment. So the maximum yearly payment is the maximum amount you will receive. So where I went through before with those tiers, for instance, tier 1, the maximum yearly payment is $40,000. If you spend more, you will not receive more. However, if you spend less than what you need to in your grant agreement to get that milestone payment, Austrade will downward apportion your grant amount, your milestone payment amount, in line with the amount that you've actually spent. So in a way, it still is acting somewhat like the reimbursement model, where they're sort of only funding you the 50% of what you spend. It's ultimately just up to your business to spend that amount to get that. So following from that, is worth noting that it still is a 50% funded program. The guideline wording from Austrade mentions, matched funding, which is obviously a bit misleading, and we've had that raised a lot from other clients that we have spoken with. But basically, we've gone and confirmed with Austrade that this is definitely still a 50% funded program. Therefore, to receive a milestone payment of $60,000, your business needs to be spending $120,000 to get that $60,000 payment amount there.
No, thanks. I think that's it is clear that it's not quite a traditional grant. It's still a reimbursement, but you'll know that certainty around the amount of payment that you can get, the maximum amount, I suppose. So that's the key difference that I keep having to explain to companies and to sole traders, obviously. So Lana, in your opinion, what are the downsides? Are there any in the new program?
Yeah, well, Chloe went through just a couple of good ones there, meaning if you spend less than what's in your grant agreement, your grant will be reduced. So even though you might get a grant agreement for a nice looking figure there, you do definitely still need to have that export marketing spend and then be reimbursed as such for that 50% of what you spend. It is just, I guess, a limiter. So Austrade know that they've got enough funds in their pool to pay for everybody's grant agreement, and you do have that certainty there. Also, you do need to be making that strategic shift to access the highest tier of grant funding. Whereas under the prior model, it was really just based off expenditure, and you could achieve the highest grant amount with just a large marketing spend. So for example, if you're new to export, under the reform model, you will be limited to that $40,000 grant in tier 1, regardless of how much you spend, even if you spend more than that. Whereas under the old program, you could kick off with some really strong overseas marketing activities, do a lot of advertising, and receive that highest grant amount back without even making an export sale yet. So it is something to keep in mind, those caps on the tiers, and looking at where you can fit into those tiers to access the best grant amount for you. Now, Austrade have said as well that an aim of the program was to reduce that administrative burden of your application. So for anyone who's made applications, you will know it is a little bit document heavy. You do need the proof of your expense and the proof of payment as well as some more details around those larger costs. And we're really yet to see if that will be reduced, because we don't know yet what's specifically in those milestone reports. And there are also 2 submissions. So there's that upfront application and that second milestone report, whereas under the prior program, it was just that initial application. And then if you get audited, they might request certain documents. So that's just something to keep an eye on going forward. We won't really know till after the first year of the program how much that administrative side of it will increase or reduce. There are a few other ones as well. So noting as well that November 30 deadline is a hard deadline. And being that it is, a forward-looking grant program, that is actually Australia going to move that deadline back as we go into the next period. It's just November 30 for the first year. So you do need to be a bit organised and have your EMDG application together and be forecasting your marketing spend before that financial year that you're going to spend it in, so you can get your applications in. It isn't just that situation now where you can retrospectively look back and go, oh, that was a great opportunity, I jumped on it, you know, we reached an export market and now I might be able to get reimbursed for those amounts. It is being a little bit more prepared up front. And as Chloe mentioned in the start as well, eligibility for the entities is reducing from 50 million turnover to 20 million turnover as well. So really targeting those export grant amounts to those smaller growing companies who can really put that to use in growing their business. So there's a few things to consider there, just around the differences of the program and how that might affect different business structures and how your overseas marketing activities are being planned going forward.
Great. So let's jump to some questions, and I've got a couple of live ones. And then we've also got some that we've aggregated from our other sessions that we've already done. But just to clarify, which you just did, Alana, so the new reform model is open to businesses under 20 mil turnover, not 50 mil like the old program. But do they have, does a company or a sole trader have had to apply in the past to be eligible for the new program?
So I can jump in and answer that one. So no, you don't have to have applied for EMDG before. You can go straight into applying for the new program. For the financial 22, where it's reduced down to the 20 million turnover, that is based off your financial 21 turnover, where it is 20 million. And then, so if you, for instance, if you've never exported before, you would fall into that tier 1. If you've never applied for EMDG before but have exported successfully in the past, you would skip tier 1 and fall either into tier 2 or tier 3, depending on your, your specific business operations and what you're doing at the moment. So we would be happy to assess that on a business by business basis. Yeah.
So are New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Fiji, Vanuatu eligible?
Yes. Yeah.
What's excluded?
Everywhere excluding Australia, New Zealand, and for IP, they like to throw North Korea in there as well. So basically, you're looking at those 3 jurisdictions which are excluded. Everywhere else is in.
Okay, no, that's good to clarify. So what if I've already claimed EMDG for 4 to 5 years? Are we limited now on how many years we can go forward? So does my previous grant history apply under the new program? I think, Chloe, you're going to have you talked about this before.
Yes. So yes, your previous grant history will come into play when you enter into the new application. You pop in your ABN and that will pull through all of your previous lodgement history. So for that example where you've received 4 to 5, we'll just say, let's say you've got 5, you've accessed 5 grants under the existing model. That means that you've got 3 grants available left up until the 8, or until you receive a maximum of $770,000 in funding, whichever one comes first. So it really depends on how much grant funding you've received over that 5-year period. You've then got 3 years less. That would either be, a tier 2 or tier 3 agreement, and then how much that grant funding is going to be worth. So you might max out your 8, or you might get to the 770 first. So whichever one of those comes, whichever one happens first.
And so how do we check? Sorry, Lana, because I think you can answer this one for us, but how do we check? Because the program's been around for a long time. So since the 80s, Chloe?
Yeah, it's been around.
So it goes back a long way. So how can you check whether you have gone to that maximum of 8? And didn't it used to be 7, or was it always 8?
Yeah, Sandy.
Yeah.
So you're right there. It did used to be 7, but it was extended to 8 applications. So we've actually been quite successful in talking to a lot of clients who thought they had maxed out their grant payments and then have found there's been one more that they're eligible for. So for anyone on the call who's maybe claimed DG in the past and thinks you've met your maximum cap, it's worth definitely checking if that was 7 or 8, because you might have an opportunity for one more grant. Now, if you are unsure of your lodgement history, you can actually do this with your ABN, do a check for it, and we can do that for you very quickly. So if you want to reach out to us with your ABN, we can look that up for you and get back to you quite quickly on that. It's also useful to know how many grants you've done before as well, to be a bit strategic about it if you are getting to that upper limit of your 8 grants. So you might want to hold off 1 year if you've got a lower marketing spend over the COVID period, and maybe use those applications in years where you know you're going to have a large marketing spend. You know, maybe you're looking at an overseas rep or branching into a new area, and you might be doing a strategic shift rather than, say, new to export at the moment. There is a way to plan that out so you can maximize your grant amounts, but of course that's all on a case-by-case basis. So reach out if you're thinking about that at all, and we can run through that.
Yeah, I think, cash is king, isn't it? So if you think you've got a good claim, our advice is to grab it while you can, because these programs can change numbers and amounts, but obviously plan it out if you can. Question on the chat, and sort of one that we've also heard, is there a minimum amount to qualify if I'm currently exporting? And if I've never applied for it before, but I've got international sales, what tier do I apply for? So a couple of questions there around minimum amounts in the old and new program, and also then if I've made sales but never got the EMDG before, what tier do I go in under?
Yeah, so happy to answer that one as well. The minimum spend still does extend to the new reform program as well. So I think that's $15,000 of minimum spend to put in an application. And as well, if you've never applied for EMDG, but you have made some international sales, assuming those eligibility criteria are met that we went through earlier, you can apply for Tier 2, even if you've made just smaller overseas sales. Tier 1 is really just for those applicants who've never exported their product before, but have their product there ready to export. So for example, it could be a business where you've made just some e-commerce sales that have gone overseas, or you distributed to just one customer overseas who's requested your product, but you've never really looked at international marketing, and now you're going into that, maybe spending a bit more there. You could actually look at that Tier 2, or potentially even Tier 3 as well, and access those higher grant amounts.
So Chloe, a lot of questions are around Tier 3. So how do people know that they'll be eligible for Tier 3? But the main question is, I suppose, is if they apply for Tier 3 in their application, but Austrade determine they're not eligible, will they just not be able to get any EMDG funding, or do they get assessed under another tier, the lower tiers?
Yeah, so I think this is something really positive about the new program. And I think, for applicants and consultants alike, not having any type of, cases to refer back to of what has gotten across the line from a strategic shift point of view will sort of be, to be tried and tested this year. I think ultimately, the examples that we went through before where, for instance, if you, like Alana was saying, if you've made, 1 or 2 e-commerce, sales luckily overseas before doing any real marketing efforts, but then, really decided to ramp that up for the financial 22 period and onwards, I think you'd have a really strong case to be like, well, we're doing something strategically different. You've never done that before. I think that would be a really strong case for a Tier 3, or examples like where if you just focused, for instance, on the UK as your first sort of market mover overseas, and then, once you've sort of got a bit of success over there, you're like, okay, let's focus now on the USA as a completely new market. That's strategically different than moving to a new market. And then they have said, around new products and everything like that as well. So it really will just depend on how it's articulated in your business plan that we would submit, and how that is strategically different to your business operations previously. And I think, the really good thing is if we pop in a Tier 3 application and Austrade say, that's not meeting the merit criteria on our end, they will assess you as a Tier 2, so you won't be completely knocked out, which I think is really positive, especially in this first year where it's sort of new to everyone as well.
So a question that's come through on the chat too is, what are our fees? So I always get asked this, and I always love this question, but we've thought long and hard about how we best want to approach this. So we've got few minutes left, so I'm going to cover a few more questions, but that one's coming up a little bit. So What are our fees? Chloe, you happy to answer that for us?
Yeah, so we have, as we were sort of saying before, there's sort of now a two-staged approach to how we apply for the new program. So it's sort of split into two. So where for the initial submission, which includes, your business details and that additional business plan, forecasting over a 2 to 3 year period. We have a fixed fee there for the preparation of that. And then basically the second part of our fee will be around the milestone report and the substantiation there. And that is basically either a percentage of your grant there with a minimum fee as well. And that basically includes, preparing that milestone report, collating that substantiation. If you're audited by Austrade, it includes us representing you and preparing any responses to Austrade as well. And then it sort of operates on a success fee type basis where once the grant funds are released, it's paid into our account, we retain the fee and then transfer the balance to you. So the only real upfront out of pocket expense will be that fixed fee for the initial submission, between now and November. But that's how it will work. And it's still a full service engagement from everything from lodgement to substantiation. And that milestone report substantiation is also provided over the life of your grant agreement. So that could either be, the 2 or 3 year period, you're engaging us for that whole time as well.
Okay, no, that's good. And I think there is a fair bit of work. So we've staged the fee in 2 phases now. So happy to talk more about that if you've got more questions. Somebody's asked, can they claim our fee as part of the grant? And my answer to that is probably not.
No.
So because we're not actively,
yes. Yeah, it really is all around your marketing efforts.
Yes.
Yes. So not
because we come in after the event.
So accounting, legal and fees like that are all excluded. So, unfortunately, no.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So overseas reps, can we claim the cost of an overseas rep if you're employing them using an overseas-based recruitment services? Are overseas reps eligible, and in what circumstances are they not eligible?
Yeah, so overseas reps are definitely eligible. So again, it really comes down to what that person's role is for you. As we mentioned before, commission payments are excluded. So, where you're paying them a retainer or a consulting fee, we can definitely look to claim, 100 or a percentage of that relates to eligible activities. If there is a commission component and a retainer component, it's just the retainer component there that is eligible. And what I mean around potentially apportioning it down is if they're doing, we're really looking at that business development work that they're doing for you overseas, where they're conducting after sales services or anything like that, or, potentially doing ineligible activities such as, capital raising and things like that. Usually we just apportion it to the percentage of marketing work that they would do.
And speaking of apportionment, Alana, what if you've got a mix of Australia and imported products sold internationally and domestically? How do you assess the Australian content? So do you have to delineate, or can you just claim the whole lot?
Yeah, so if you've got your products that are from overseas or from Australia, so your manufacturing is partly overseas or either way, you can claim marketing around all of those products. You just need to show that there's still a substantial Australian input to your product. So that means looking at a balance of factors there. So whether your business operations are in Australia, maybe your products might be designed here, but still manufactured overseas and then sent out from, China or wherever you're manufacturing to your customers overseas. Look at whether you employ staff in Australia, all of those things as well. And that involves putting in an extra document with your EMDG application, outlining that substantial Australian input to all of those products. And we can help prepare that as well with the application. And then you can claim the marketing costs around exporting those, even if they are physically taken from your manufacturer to your clients, in Europe or the US or whatnot. You still definitely can look at that as part of the claim, but and so no need to apportion marketing costs there. But if your products are manufactured overseas and they're designed overseas, and that is something to consider as well, you might want to look a little bit further into those eligibility.
It's probably something good to have a discussion with us offline and just talk about the actual facts. I think that's when it gets to be a delineation between the two markets. Last question, because I think we finish at 1:15. And we've still got lots of other questions, so we will come back to you offline and answer some. And some people have already given us their ABNs to check their registration history, so that's great. Happy to do that for you. But last question, is the grant available for business development in existing markets or customers? So if you've got an existing market offshore and you're already doing BD over there or export market activities, can we claim those even though we haven't claimed before?
Yeah, so I think that sounds a bit like, a tier 2, so where you're currently expanding in your current markets. So what we can look to do there is, again, a tier 2, again, it would be worth, having a discussion with you to understand, what specifically you are doing, if we can push there for a tier 3. But essentially, if you're, marketing to the US and you've been marketing to the US for the last 3 years, you've got a really nice recipe that's working well for you, happy for you to continue doing that. It would be around the tier 3. And yes, upselling as well is also eligible. So, where you've already got a good customer client base and you're looking to re-sign, new distribution agreements or upsell them with new products, definitely that's all still eligible marketing. It's really, the things that are ineligible is, investment, capital raising, and then after actually providing an after sales service. Everything around, marketing, upselling, re-engaging or re-signing contracts and everything like that, that's all marketing and all claimable there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chloe. I think that's really helpful. And I know we've come to the end of time, and this is a great program. So we really encourage you to think about accessing both the old program and the new. As you can see, Ilana and Chloe are our go-to experts. So it's great to have them as part of the team. Grant Thornton would love to assist you. We do this all the time. We've got many, many claimants already very interested and engaged with us doing the FY22 plus the old reimbursement model. So there's sort of 2 things to be doing and thinking about this year. We are really proud of the fact that we have QIP status for the old program, which means we've had very little costs knocked out. So we clearly, in my view, know what we're doing. So which is a nice way to be. Quick thing too about Trusted Trader. I mentioned that really briefly. If you are interested, do reach out on that too, because that can streamline your actual export activities. But back to you, Leslie, and thank you so much. Just before I hand back to you, we've really appreciated the opportunity of being able to chat. As you can see, our knowledge is pretty detailed and thorough, but love to have more discussions with your members, and we appreciated the time slot today. So thank you so much.
Oh, our pleasure. And thanks to you, Sandy, and to Chloe and Ilana and to Amy. Thanks for setting this up. This was very valuable. As I mentioned earlier, EMDG is a scheme that is well used by our members. I'm sure there'll be more questions cycling. So what we got here was the mix of both worlds, a good overview about the philosophy to how the scheme is changing. So the issues about transparency and knowing how much you're going to receive without that kind of lottery about how it's modulated back given how oversubscribed the scheme is. And that comes with some downsides in that you've got to try and forecast what's going to happen internationally in these COVID times. So the next year is going to be fraught with some complexity, but we really appreciated that we got the overview and the detail of the questions. And I think the questions were outstanding, which shows you how in depth our members are going down that path of what does this new scheme mean for us. So thank you so much. That was exactly what we asked for. I am absolutely delighted with the content. And for our members online, thank you so much. We know that these things are valued if you log in. So thank you for joining the session. Please do let us know what else you'd like to hear about. We may even reach back out again, Sandy, closer to that, November deadline, maybe 4 to 6 weeks out from that deadline to remind people that it's coming up. And you might know some more at that time too. So
exactly, we may have had some feedback. So absolutely, don't miss the deadline. That's if it's one thing that you leave our session with today, you've got until 30 November. So you don't want to sort of wake up on the 2nd of December and go, oh, I forgot. So yes, we'll keep you posted.
A good message. So thanks very much to all of our panel. Thanks again to Michelle Vizzuti, and thank you to all the participants. I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Leslie. Bye, everyone.